Welcome. We are live. Welcome to the first online Prisma Meetup. I'm your host, Daniel. And today we have a very interesting lineup of speakers with some really exciting topics. Because this is our first meetup, I'd like to welcome all of you. We're going to be hosting many more of these. And we want these to be a space where we talk about Prisma and also many related topics such as databases and everything related to the intersection between databases, Prisma, and application development. And so without any further delay, I'd like to invite Tammy Bryant, who's the principal site reliability engineer of Gremlin, and her talk title is Database Horror Stories. So before I bring her on stage, I'd like to introduce her. So Tammy is a principal site reliability engineer, as I mentioned, where she works on chaos engineering, the facilitation of controlled experiments to identify systemic weaknesses. Previously, she's led SRE teams at Dropbox, responsible for databases and storage systems used by over 500 million customers. And prior to this, she's worked at DigitalOcean and one of Australia's largest banks in security engineering, product engineering, and infrastructure engineering. So now I bring you Tammy. Tammy, welcome. It's so nice to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
So I'm going to bring your slide on stage. Is there anything else you would like to add before you get started?
Happy Halloween. It's great to be here. And if you have any questions, please just post them in the chat and I'll answer them at the end. Thanks so much.
Great.
All right, are we ready?
Yes, we are. You're free to go.
Okay, perfect. Hey everyone. So you can find me on Twitter, TammyXBryant, or you can drop me an email anytime, tammy@gremlin.com. So today I'm here to share some spooky database horror stories. I'm actually originally from Australia, so that's my accent. I live in the USA in Florida, the most Australian place that I could find in America. And yeah, I've been here for 6 years now. And like Daniel said, I previously worked at Dropbox leading the databases team there. So that was 500 petabytes of data across databases, Magic Pocket, block storage. And then also I was able to actually handle the load required to meet the needs of 500 million customers with my team. So that was really exciting. But also, I do have a lot of horror stories to share over the last few years. So what is a horror story? I think today we'll go with like the informal definition. So a distressing experience. Things that, you know, are just like, oh my goodness. I'm sure if you've ever been on call and you're watching today, you'll know what it feels like when you get a page or you see your metrics rising in a way that you don't want them to, or you see a ton of error messages getting posted to the logs. And you're like, this is definitely a distressing experience. Now we need to get on there and we need to be able to figure out what's wrong and how we can solve it. So it's definitely not fun. Thought it would be fun to also just get you to interact in the chat. So I'd love to hear what your favorite classic horror story is and why. So horror movie or just traditional story. Be fun to be able to hear that, and we can circle back and go into some of the details about why you like those stories so much. So now it's spooky database time. So the first story that I wanted to share with you is called The Dealer of Damage. So on a dark and stormy day, we started to see a rise in errors for the database. Things didn't seem cool at all. Something was definitely wrong, and we were all on edge wondering what was happening. Why were we seeing log messages just saying there's problems connecting to the database, problems customers can't reach the database? What's going on? We were digging into the metrics and the logs, and we saw that this distressing experience was being caused by specific types of queries. So if you've ever looked into databases or worked on a databases team, you'll see when you have your SQL queries coming to connect to your database, they'll be doing different types of things. So in this case, they were trying to load a specific page and be able to display specific items on that page. And we're just seeing a lot of those queries coming up over and over. And then there was a lot of folks trying to add data, but it looked like the same queries. So maybe you think you start to do some detective work during this horror scenario. So it's distressing already, but you have to be a detective at the same time. We're like, what kind of queries are they? Are they from one user? Is this a user that's doing something bad? Do we need to ban this user? That's something that you might want to do. If you see a lot of queries that are really bad from one user, you can actually have a temporary ban to stop that issue until you resolve it. Or maybe it was coming from one specific type of source. So that's what happened when we looked into these queries. We realized they were coming from one specific source. So if you have query metadata, which is super handy to have, you'll be able to quickly identify the source. So for example, even if you make it really simple and just have www and API as your two sources for types of queries, so people going to www or people using your API, another type we'd have would be desktop client, or you might have mobile app, mobile client. So we knew then, oh, okay, looks like it's a specific set of users, but also a specific type of source, the API. Then we're like, oh my goodness, our API is almost taking down our database. And this has happened to me at many places that I've worked, and I've seen it happen to tons of friends that have worked at different companies. So why might your API be taking down your database? There's a lot of things that can go wrong there, right? Maybe you have rate limiting, but maybe the rate limiting isn't good enough. Or maybe, it hasn't been implemented correctly. Maybe you need to revamp it and fix it. But also just being able to quickly understand what these queries are, what they're doing, who's sending the queries, who's creating the queries, what source they're coming from. It enables you to actually quickly diagnose and look into the issue and get it resolved. So what did we do? We laid down the hammer on the bad queries and the bad storm passed. So how do you lay down the hammer? A lot of the time, if you're in a situation where you've got, tens of thousands of databases, you need to be able to have automated tools to do that, to lay down that hammer. So we actually had built tools to be able to do this in these situations. So then we can reach out to people, we can reach out to other teams and understand, why is this downstream issue happening? Why is this system suddenly trying to overload the database? Let's keep everyone else's experience awesome while we fix the cause of this big problem. So that's the first story, the dealer of damage. If you've ever had this happen to you or you've experienced it yourself, please share in the chat. Love to know, but definitely happens a lot. Something to watch out for. The next one that I wanted to share is called Drop Dead. So this is another interesting horror story, probably one of the worst ever. Suddenly in the office, you could feel the pressure intensify. The air was cold. No one was moving. I could just tell that something was wrong. My job that day was to be on call and be able to understand if we needed to let customers know that something was wrong with the systems, something wasn't working right. And then I was supposed to help in war room situations to be able to guide the team to get to a resolution fast, to improve the mean time to resolution. Something was very, very wrong. You can just tell when something's gone really bad. I can always feel it in my bones, especially when you're in an office. It's a little bit harder now that we're all remote. Someone on our team had accidentally dropped the entire production database. Oh my goodness. Really bad situation. This is everyone's nightmare. When you think about this, I'd never seen this happen before, but obviously it's something that should not be able to happen, right? You should have protections in place to prevent anyone from being able to actually even do that. So it's not the person's fault that it happened. They did it by accident, but you just shouldn't even be able to do that at all. It's a really bad situation. How do you prevent that from happening? You can just put in controls that prevent people from being able to run drop database commands. So it's not even possible. But that definitely was a horror story situation. You can imagine we got into the room. We quickly understood what was happening. We were able to recover the database, but it was a tough situation for everybody involved. It really brought us together as a team, and we made sure that afterwards we put in place a lot of things to prevent that from happening again. Everyone's nightmare. The next story, proxy trap. In the middle of the night, an engineer would enter the office and code all night long, but nobody ever saw him or even knew what he looked like. They just knew that he wrote code, thousands and thousands of lines of code, and the systems that he built were critical for everyone to be able to use the service. But he would leave before everyone even arrived at the office. He didn't like working during the day. He was the biggest night owl I've ever heard of. Nobody understood what the code did though, and he was managing it and writing all the code himself. This is what can happen in small startups, right? But what did this mysterious code even do? How did it even work? To a lot of people, it was really spooky. Can you imagine being the engineer that has to go and modify this proxy code? Can you imagine having to actually try and test the code, to submit a PR, to understand what the code's doing when it's already massive and you've got no one that you can ask about it? It's actually a pretty difficult situation. Most folks didn't even want to touch that code. If you could work on a million other projects, why choose this one? Then something big happened. He decided to move on. So if he wasn't going to be at the company anymore, what were we going to do? And the proxy started to rumble. Lots of problems were occurring. We had to do something. The first thing that we tried to do was read all of the code. I actually printed out all of the code for this proxy so we could read it and understand it. That's something that I've always liked to do since like 2004. If I've got some really old legacy code, I just like to read it like a book. I definitely don't think that's what most people do, but I found that it really helps me a lot, be able to understand it, go through, take my own notes, understand what's actually going on with the code and why different failures might be occurring. The other thing that we realized was there was no monitoring for this proxy. We just knew that queries went in and queries came out, but we didn't know what was actually going on in the middle. This makes it a bit scary too, right? If some queries go in, how do you know that all the queries are coming out? How do you know that they're all coming out correctly? What is the proxy doing to the queries while it's handling them? So many questions come up when you think about a proxy. Is it modifying them? Does it have some protections in place? Is it preventing bad queries from passing through the proxy and hitting the database? Those are all the types of things that you wonder. So one thing we needed to do though was figure out how we could stop this proxy rumbling. We decided that we'd actually purposely inject failure into the proxy to understand if we could figure out how to handle it better. So we started to spin up clusters of proxy machines and then gracefully fail them, but also fail them ungracefully and see what the different impact was. And we could do this on our staging environment, so it was way safer than having to do it on production. It's a great way to learn about what's going on. We then could try and implement more monitoring and observability to understand what was actually happening with this proxy as it was handling all of these different queries. That enabled us to actually figure out how we could fix some of the issues, some of the rumbling. We implemented those fixes, a lot of things around how we could more gracefully shut down the proxy and spin up new proxies, how we could actually spin up new proxies, large numbers of them at a really fast, quick speed and handle queries well. We then took all our learnings from staging and put them into production, and we stopped a lot of the rumbling. That then gave us time to be able to figure out how we could migrate away from this proxy and actually decommission it over time. But definitely a big horror story. SQL alchemy. Something that you've probably heard of as well if you work with databases. Something I'd never really used that much over the years because I would just write SQL myself when I'm interacting with a database. But a lot of developers, especially application engineers, product engineers, like to use tools like SQL Alchemy because it makes it easier to be able to interact with the database. But we had to upgrade SQL Alchemy. This is actually a horror story in itself. Just having to upgrade that, who is going to volunteer to take on that project? That has to be a very brave engineer that wants to do that upgrade when you've got, thousands and thousands of lines of code in your database that you need to go and check to see that it still works once you do the upgrade. That's the big thing there, right? You've got one version, you need to then upgrade to another version and make sure that all of the queries still work that you previously created with SQL Alchemy. That's a huge project. This is something that made all of us look at each other with fear in our eyes when we first heard that we need to do this. We started to think and talk about how could we do this safely? How could we gradually roll this out? How could we test and make sure that we were confident that we were doing the right thing? Would we uncover something along the way? What would try to trip us up? How could we be careful up front so that we didn't get hit by different traps along the way? We embarked on this epic journey filled with dark corners and spooky situations. It definitely wasn't what I would call fun. It was really hard, and we had to painstakingly go through every day and check to make sure that we were doing the right work. we had a lot of great people review the PRs, review the code to make sure that everything looked good. And we would check before and after to make sure that we were doing a great job. We did do it successfully, but it took us an eternity, and we finally defeated the SQL Alchemy upgrade. Definitely a horror story situation, not something that I would wish on a friend. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. And now I would love to take questions. Thank you.
Tammy, thank you for that. That was really interesting. I think we've all had our share of those kind of experiences. I remember back when I started web development about 11 years ago, I also lost, I was designing a database schema, and once it was all done, I lost it.
Oh, no.
And so I had to really rework it from scratch.
Yeah, that's the worst. There's so many horror stories, right, of schema migrations, like just so many horrible stories related to databases. I know some good stories too, but today's all about the bad ones.
Yeah. So let's see if we get some questions right now.
And hi to everyone in the chat. It's great to see all of your posts.
Yeah, we have viewers joining from what seems like Japan, India, Nicaragua, the US. So welcome, everyone. And if you don't have questions, I'd like to thank you, Tammy.
Yep, thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Daniel. Have a great day.
Pleasure. Have a good one.
Bye.
Okay, we now come to the second part of today's meetup. And for that, we have our very own Hervé. So Hervé is the Prisma's Vice President of Product, and today he'll be talking about the future of Prisma and its roadmap. So a little bit about Hervé. Hervé's background is as an engineer, and he's worked previously at Google and Contentful. So now I bring you to the stage. Hervé, welcome, Hervé. It's nice to have you.
Hi, Daniel. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
All right. So you ready?
Yeah, always. Happy to start.
Okay, so I'll put your slide up on the screen and remove that.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's get started. Let's go through a little bit of an agenda. So as Daniel said, I'm leading product at Prisma. You can find me on Twitter. I'm randomly joining there, and also on GitHub, where I keep tabs on what's going on as well. And so today I want to talk a little bit more about our mission at Prisma. What are we there to achieve? How do we break down this mission into some focus areas that we use to inform how we tackle our work? I'll brush through the last 3 months worth of changes on the Prisma front, so you kind of know what's been going on, and then close with what's upcoming. So the treats part of the Halloween trick or treats, I guess. So yeah, let's get started. Our mission is pretty simple. We just want to make databases easier to work with as a software developer. We know databases are complicated, and this is really something we strive for, making simpler to work with. And we really want to look at that holistically, and not just through the current solutions we have, but really try to look at that and what kind of solutions can we put together and eventually offer, so that eventually you really focus on what you love doing the most, which is building apps. Right now, our focus areas are threefold. We want to enable developers first to make the most out of their data infrastructure. You want to be able to use the databases that you have at hand, the ones you know about, and you want to interact with them through an API that's easy to use, that's type safe, that gives you confidence and productivity in general. So this is where we would typically work on the client features, adding new connectors so you can support a multitude of different databases, so that eventually you can really make the most out of them. The second aspect is managing changes to the data model, the schemas, without hassle. This is one part that can be quite scary to do, especially on production. Changing schemas of your database is like leading to potential data losses or downtime, and so really want to make that process smooth, reliable, and easy to work with too. And finally, the one that we also look at is just feeling productive in your environment. So not just feeling productive when it comes to building the pieces of the app talking to the database, but as a whole, like looking at the stack that you're using, so that Prisma can be an integral part of it, but also the toolkits you're using, the development environment you're in, and making that really nice and fluid to work with Prisma. So I'm using these three areas to break down the kind of work we're doing. So you'll see these colors coming up in the deck a little bit. So let's go through recent changes. Last 3 months have been quite busy, um, and the first pillar is what I'm gonna talk about first. We introduced a bunch of different API changes so that you essentially have less and less to rely on raw SQL to make some of the operations you would otherwise do. Um, we had some gaps there that we continuously filling. One of them was distinct, being able to do distinct queries, aggregations, ordering by multiple columns. We also recently introduced a find first method, which was kind of a limitation of our find one and find many methods. So we're trying to really make that easier to just work with and being more productive querying. We also work with operations to handle transactional use cases. The atomic number operations was one part of that, so making it easier to just make changes in an atomic way without having to lean on complex transactions. We also introduced in preview multiple API signatures like connect or create or transaction to just manage transactional operation, either through nested writes or just as a sequence of operations you want to run within a transaction. Another one that I'm particularly a fan of is really instrumentation using middlewares. So we have this use method that you can use to define hooks in your code so that you can change the way or instrument your code base that takes every single Prisma call that you can wrap and just observe and potentially change the call itself. So that allows you to do things like measuring the time difference between the beginning and the end of a call. You can transform like a delete into an actual soft delete. So instead of actually deleting, updating a flag in the database. So that really gives you a lot of superpowers when it comes to dealing with your code base. Very new, actually, as of yesterday, we introduced a new connector in preview, which is Microsoft SQL Server, that supports currently the introspection workflow and the Prisma client. And there's a bunch of caveats. So this is a preview feature, and preview features at Prisma means that you can count on them. They do have some known issues. They may have some edge cases and bugs that we didn't fully cover yet, and we're actively working on fixing them and bringing these preview features to GA. Migrate is not supported yet. That means you still have to deal with the schema directly. But there's a lot of users who already have SQL Server databases and could use a Prisma client to work with them in TypeScript. Looking at managing schema changes, two big things that we've worked on the last 3 months. One was reintrospection and introspection together are now one. You can really make changes and keep your Prisma schema up to date with the changes that are happening on the database level. So that's typically when you're working within teams where the database is shared and some changes can be done by other teams, and you want to make sure your Prisma schema is kept up to date. You can just reintrospect and make sure that everything is really up to date. The other one that we just introduced yesterday in preview is called the Prisma DB push. That is really just about bringing your database schema to par with your Prisma schema in one single command. And that doesn't create migrations. That's really just bringing it up so that you can just straight up start working with it. It doesn't create migrations. It's mostly done for supporting prototyping use cases, and during development can be very handy. We also heard of people who want to use it just as their regular workflow because they don't necessarily need to keep tabs on migrations and go back in history of the changes they've done to their schemas. So I clearly incentivize you to look at that and try it out. We'll work on bringing that to GA also soon too. Third pillar is really making you productive. We have a VS Code plugin, and we've done quite a lot of changes incrementally on it. One of the ones I like a lot is this rename helper, that refactor rename sort of function, so that you can easily manage and rename things in your schema. Um, Plus a lot more improvements there. So if you're using VS Code, you should definitely make sure you have this Prisma plugin installed. Another big thing we brought to GA recently is Prisma Studio. Prisma Studio is a visual data browser so that you can easily manage the data in the database that you're currently working with. It's web browser based, so you don't really need to have anything installed beyond your Prisma project. You launch it through the CLI, and then you can just manage your data without thinking too much about the underlying complexities of the database itself. So that's about it on the recent changes. Quite a lot of things going on. So now let's talk a little bit about what's coming up. So the first introduction is these buckets. So today's today. We have some things we plan to do, which we are committing to work on. They're roughly some things we're going to work within this quarter. And there's a bucket about what we're considering doing. What we're considering doing is something we have pretty much confidence we're going to tackle. We still have like some questions, some discussions with the users, the community, some validations to run, and we may reshuffle these plans. But that's really giving you a hint at the direction we're taking. So planned, committed, considering something that you can look at to see where we're going. Again, all of the things I'm going to show, they're also not shown in a specific order, and they don't represent necessarily the complexity or the size. This is really about really giving you an overview of what we're doing. Solutions for transactional use cases. We heard a lot of feedback about long-running transactions. Specifically, we really want to make Prisma developers able to work with transactional use cases, but also adopt the best practices when it comes to working with transactions. Prisma aims at being deployed on modern data infrastructures like serverless functions. So databases there require some specific attention when it comes to the way transactions are managed. And long-running transactions have a history of being problematic in lots of various situations. And there's a lot of interesting patterns out there to actually approach the problems differently. And we want to make Prisma really well suited to tackle them and offer APIs and guides and solutions and help so that everyone can just benefit from them, and so that these applications can scale and just be deployed on any kind of infrastructure you want, and not being limited to maybe some internal constraints of the design pattern that transactions may have sometimes. So we're actively going to work on this soon. We also want to limit raw SQL fallbacks. Like that's something that basically defeats the purpose of having a nice type safe API. So anything that you need to fall back on raw SQL, we're going to try to limit that and provide an API for it. So that covers group by, for example, filtering on Scala arrays in Postgres, but also some iterations on our existing features. We are currently actively working on native database types. Native database types are about fine-tuning the way your Prisma schema, a field, is translated in terms of storage in the database. So you can really fine-tune the size of strings. You can fine-tune the exact type of number that you want to use. So this is really about optimizing storage on one hand and getting a bit more finer control over the database. And eventually we want to use that also to help with some validation and just in general giving a little bit more control over the details of your schema. We're going to have a preview relatively soon, either in the next release or the release after that, probably. So stay tuned. This is really one of the biggest focus at the moment. We also released Microsoft SQL Server in preview. We want to make that stable. That's essentially what this is about. So that means bringing native database types there and also implementing migrations with SQL Server. We are actively working on migrate. This is the biggest priority by far of the product and engineering team at the moment, stabilizing migrate and proposing that as part of the stable product. The current migrate has some internal, let's say, by design some limitations when it comes to the way it behaves. And so we are taking a different approach at the moment, so that we generate imperative migrations based on your schema that you can still customize and then run predictably on production. We're opening up an early access program so you can subscribe, discuss with the product team and the team who's building that, provide feedback, give it a try, see how it works. So this is really going on at the moment. We also want to, I talked about integrating within your stack and your environment. Type safety in Prisma is great, but if you're building GraphQL API, we want to make sure you can do that also in a type safe way. And that's why we invest in Nexus Schema, and we want to bring Nexus Schema to a 1.0 release, fixing some outstanding bugs, making the integration with Prisma nice and smooth eventually. So this is also a focus of the team there. We have some discovery, so this is why this bulb is out there, discovery on productivity solutions in general. So Studio is really about making you productive, building, like dealing with your data without having to worry too much about how exactly it's done under the hood. There's some other solutions we want to investigate in there without giving you so much detail. You can just reach out to us and also tell us what you think, what you're expecting. But we're going to have a stream of work in that direction, and helping you dealing with understanding complex models, trying out and iterating on queries and sharing them. So things like that. Now onto the considering bucket. There's a topic that we also want to discover more about, which is the Prisma schema's modularity. When projects grow and become, like, for example, monorepo, or like multiple modules, depending on multiple different parts of a schema that you eventually need to stitch together, working with Prisma can become a bit more difficult, and we want to start looking into how to make that better and easier to define. So importing multiple schema files and composing things, and having more control over this in general. Cascading behavior is really a big thing as well that we want to tackle, and that touches obviously cascading delete, but in general, how do we define cascading behavior in the schema? How do we handle migrations for them? How do you query that? What's the impact on updating or deleting records using our API? So that's something we're gonna look at next too. Document databases, in particular MongoDB, has been heavily requested, and we want to start opening up that. I mentioned document databases because MongoDB is a prominent one, but we want to design Prisma so that it can possibly talk to different document databases, not just MongoDB, but also others eventually. And last but not least, extensibility and integrations. We are in a place where services, solution, frameworks, they just multiply, and it's impossible to keep tabs on and integrate with every single one of them. So what we want to do there is start opening up places where the community can contribute and integrate with their favorite tools or stacks, connectors, and whatnot with Prisma. So we can offer you a core set of functionality, and then ways for you to extend some of them, so that you don't need to wait for us to build every single piece of integration on the planet. And so what the plan there would be is to start with a few core integrations and extensions, so that eventually people can use them as models, and figure them the ones they want to build themselves. So that's the roadmap. You have a link up there. We strive to make updates to the roadmap every other week, every 3-4 weeks in general, and we revisit the focus areas and the themes on a regular basis too. So that's where we communicate changes. But hopefully that gives you a better understanding of all of that. I will skip these ones. I just talked through them, but it's going to be in the handover material. You can read more about them. I just want to conclude this presentation with the fact that yes, we love feedback. We want to hear from you. You're a great community. We have a lot of input and questions, ideas, and we just want to hear from them. We just want to understand what are the biggest pain points you have with the product. What are opportunities we have to solve some of these pain points, and what are the products we can build and solutions we can bring that make sense and would really make your lives easier. So for that, we have an early access program. I talked about Migrate. We're currently opening up There's a survey you can respond, so you can be part of that program and get access to a specific package with the new migrate. Test it out, see how it works. So yeah, feel free to scan that code or follow that link, and you'll be in touch with our product team. You can tell us everything about what you expect from migrate. And yeah, that's it for me. Thanks, everyone.
Hervé, thank you so much for that. That was insightful, and it sounds like we have a very promising future in the months ahead for Prisma.
Yeah, I hope so.
Is there a specific thing from the roadmap that you're particularly excited about?
That's a great question. There's lots of things. I'm excited about a lot of these things, to be honest. I think like document databases and looking at how we can really look at data holistically is obviously a big one. I have a personal favorite with also extensibility. That's been something that in my previous um, experiences I've been exposed to, and I think this is really one of the ways you can really build a platform and a great community, giving lots of solutions for people to really get creative. We already have lots of super interesting projects from the community using generators like DBML generator, docs generator, Nest.js,
We also had
TypeGraphQL.
the
Like there's
JSON schema
JSON
generator.
schema generation. There's a lot of these things already that we can see, even if we don't officially support them. And so I'm also very excited about seeing what we can do there, so that the community can also contribute in a structured way. So yeah, these would be the ones I would call out.
Great. You ready for some questions?
Yeah.
So we had a question from Benji, who asked if there are any plans to define constraints and fields, such as validation, or is that out of scope for Prisma?
So actually, interestingly enough, we talked about that today quite a bit. In general, I wouldn't say it's out of scope for Prisma. I think validation of data that you bring into your database is essential. You want to make sure that you have sane data in your data stores. So there's eventually something you need to do about that. There's obviously lots of various places where validation occurred as business rules validation, which is something that lives usually at the application level. There's the format of the data. There is the actual just um, the type of the data itself. Like is that a UUID, which is a string, but is that following the format of a UUID, for example? So we talk about some of these things. We're going to have a look at that topic as a whole and look at them in layers, but making sure that the design that we're looking at is leaving the door open to take more of these things. And I think combined with extensibility, we could look at eventually some things like custom validations and so on. But that's further off in the plans, unfortunately.
And so I think you touched on the topic of transactions and what we might have in the near future with optimistic concurrency control, OCC.
Yes.
We also had another question which asked to define what is a long running transaction. Do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. So long running transaction is essentially in a process you would open a transaction, send a query, typically fetch some content. For example, submitting an order, so you get an order ID from your database. Then you would do another call, let's say to Stripe API, say, hey, this order ID has been submitted to us, and we want to charge some money for that. You do that call to the Stripe API, you get something back, and then you want to update your database again, saying, "Hey, the Stripe API came back, and now I can actually commit that result into my database." So this back and forth like leaves the transaction open, because if there's an error in between, the reflex would be I just commit once everything is been done and everything is okay, and I roll back if there's an error, let's say in the Stripe API. That is a typical, let's say, way of thinking that long running transactions come with. But the problem they come with too is that they apply locks on the tables, on the rows. They end up also keeping up a stateful connection with the database itself, that make it very hard to scale applications when you start to look at, for example, serverless functions, but also other kinds of horizontal scalable systems. So what instead you try to do is group together the calls that need to happen on the database and do what we call optimistic concurrency control, which is really checking on the database to make sure that the field that you queried in the first place has still the same value, so you know nothing has tampered your data, and instead of just leaning on the transaction to do that job. Um, we'll have a much more detailed set of guides and cookbooks to explain something that I'm doing like my best to answer like vocally. I think with like an actual example, and code and approaches and documentation, it would be much easier to understand, I hope. But yeah, that's the gist of it.
I see. We also had a really interesting question coming in about if it makes even sense to develop APIs. If we can query our database with serverless functions or directly within our front end with Next. And I think this perhaps speaks to the kind of database and data access patterns that are now possible with Next, essentially with server-side rendering and static-side rendering. Suddenly we're seeing that it's possible to build apps without necessarily introducing an API. Do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Oh yeah, thoughts? Yes, of course. Yeah, that's a broad topic. I think it highly depends on the use case you have at hand. If you're building using Next, you likely would build a statically generated website, or, as you said, server-side rendering for like slightly more dynamic um, parts of the web app. But there's some cases where you really have a highly dynamic application that is, for example, a business system that you lean on. Um, which is where the querying would happen. I think we need to also be clear that if you're querying through from Next.js, you're actually querying the database during the build process, which is not necessarily exactly client side. Like you essentially do that still on a server to some degree. I mean, this the build server in that case, but not really on the front end per se. So like querying the database directly is something you do from a server, and that server is either a serverless function, it's an actual server, it's a build system. It's rare, and it's usually not advised to query, like to put queries directly on the front end. That's kind of exposing something that's pretty deep in the stack, pretty much high on your end. So yeah, I hope that covers. I think there's lots of different situations where querying database is really needed in the server. If you want to, for example, another case is um, to to combine data from multiple data sources so that you can make that available to, let's say, an application, and that's another case where you also definitely need to have access to that there.
Yeah, and on the topic of API, it's probably worth mentioning that if you're building an application that has multiple clients, like an iOS, an Android app, and a web app, that's kind of like where having an API really makes sense, as kind of like a one coherent access point from all your clients to your data.
Definitely. Yep.
Okay. I think one last question that I think is worth maybe touching on from Victor Iris. Is it planned to have a create many operation? I think we get that one asked quite often.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, we talked about this too. Oops. I'm sorry about that. I hope you can still hear me. Yeah. We talked about that. This is not necessarily something I would put on the roadmap as a block, but that's something we would be looking at. There's definitely a case for that. Right now, it's mostly relying on this raw SQL fallback, and we want to look at how do we improve this.
Great. Okay, so I think on that note, we'll wrap up the Q&A. There's still some questions, so I would really appreciate it if you could take a look at those and answer in the chat.
Yeah, I'll stick
Hervé,
around.
thank you so much for joining. It's really been a pleasure to have you here and to sort of be able to sort of take a step back, because we have these bi-weekly releases. This is also a quick reminder that we just released yesterday version 2.10.0 of Prisma. And besides that, it's always nice to sort of take a step back and take a look at the broader picture. So thank you for sharing that with the community.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And we hope to have you here soon.
Yeah, of course, count on it.
Okay, so in the next part, so thank you, Hervé. In the next and perhaps last part of today's Prisma meetup, we have a very, very special guest. We have Tom Hutchinson, who's the head of mobile at Rapha, is going to be joining us for a demo and a bit of a conversational chat where we're going to discuss how Prisma is helping them. In case you don't know Tom loves riding bikes and all things mobile and has brought these passions together leading the mobile team at Rapha. In case you don't know, Rapha is a performance roadwear company. And they produce sportwear and lifestyle equipment for road cycling. And so now, without any further delay, I will bring you Tom to the stage. Welcome, Tom. So nice to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here and to be able to share a little bit about what we've been working on with Prisma over the last year or so.
Right. So you are going to start with a demo, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a couple of slides to share, and then I'll jump right into a demo, and then maybe we can have a little chat about where we're using Prisma and how we're using it.
Fantastic. Cool. So I'll bring the slide onto the stage.
Great. Cool. All right, I guess I'll start. So yeah, thanks. If you don't know me, I'm Tom, and I'm fortunate enough to lead the mobile team here at Rapha. If you're not a keen cyclist, there's a good chance you'll be unfamiliar with Rapha. So I'll just take a couple of moments to fill you in about what we're about. For the past 15 years, we've really worked to redefine comfort, performance, and style for cyclists around the world, from beginners all the way through to the World Tour professionals. We regularly organize and sponsor unique rides and events around the world. And in 2015, we founded Rapha Cycling Club to bring cyclists together. Today, we have more than 17,000 members around the world. We also have 21 clubhouses across Europe, North America, and Asia. And these act as hubs for both cycling club members and local cyclists, offering cafe space and stocking our latest products. We've worked with the sport's best athletes from our earliest days, and today we continue to work at the top tiers of professional cycling with World Tour teams Canyon SRAM and EF Educational First Pro Cycling. Last year, we launched the Rapha Foundation, which provides funding to non-profit organizations to help build a better future for the sport by supporting the next generation of racers. But today I'm just going to focus on the part of Rapha where we've recently deployed and had really good success with Prisma, and that's the Rapha Cycling Club. At its heart, the Rapha Cycling Club is a worldwide community of cyclists who ride together, and our members receive a number of benefits, including the opportunity to take part in one of hundreds of rides and events and experiences happening every week all around the world. They get early access to our most anticipated releases, alongside some exclusive products and collaborations, and they can hire high-spec bikes and receive 50% off coffee at all our clubhouses. And they access all of this through a dedicated members-only app, and I'd love to share it with you now. So I'll just bring up my phone on the screen here. So this is the RCC members app. When users open the app, they land at the highlight screen, and this is like a 1,000-foot view of the RCC. They can see the latest news, they can view the latest products and upcoming launches, they can read stories for inspiration, they can find events happening all around the world. Now here's a fun one happening in Singapore. Oh, it's quite long. I can see my invitations from other members, some more products. I can see what my friends are up to, and I have a quick access to all the member benefits. As I said, we have a whole lot of stuff going on around the world every week, and they can find this all on the What's On screen. I can see here in London, we got some hill climbs coming up tomorrow, a special shopping event, some online races, and much, much more. Because the member base is so spread out across the world, members tend to organize themselves into groups. Here I am in the London chapter. We have a bunch of upcoming rides and a lot of members here in London. But as you can see, we zoom out around the world. There's a lot going on, no matter where you are. Finally, we have chat. Whenever you join a ride or a group, you put in a chat room with all the other members so you can discuss where you're going to meet and maybe where you're going to have a coffee stop. And if you want to get in touch with anyone, you can just send them a direct message from here. Finally, we also have the in-app membership card. When you visit one of our clubhouses or partner cafes, you can get discounted coffee, as I said. So you just show your membership card to get that. And that's the RCC app in a nutshell, really. It'd be great to kind of talk about, you know, what powers this and where we're using Prisma.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries.
I was taken off by some questions on the chat, and I got lost in transition.
No
because
worries.
of the live demo. Yeah, thanks a lot for that. I mean, we met earlier, and you showed me all that, and I was like, wow, that's awesome. I really love the app. I really love the brand. I think you're doing really a great job there. And so I was when we discussed, I think that was really what was really interesting to me is like the role, your role is really spanning across quite a lot of responsibilities. Like you're really dealing also with lots of things on the data infrastructure side to some degree. Can you tell us a little bit about your stack and where Prisma fits and what you're using Prisma in which context, technically speaking, you're using Prisma?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll start at the kind of top of our stack and make my way down. I feel that's always easy. So the apps, our mobile, iOS, and Android apps, they talk to our back end through a GraphQL API, and that's powered by Nexus Schema and Apollo server. We're also using the Nexus Prisma bindings, obviously, to get data from our database. But this is where things get a little bit more complicated. Some data, such as users' names, they originate from our e-commerce platform. And obviously, every time we want to show someone's name in the app, we don't want to reach out over a REST service and, you know, create a slow experience for our customers. So we cache all of that in a Redis cluster so we can get access to it really, really fast. Other data, such as our upcoming launches and stories, they are stored in a content management system, actually Contentful. But Nexus Schema makes it super, super easy, you know, to take data no matter where it's coming from, be it the CMS or in our Redis cluster, and just kind of serve it up alongside the data from our database, which is like a big bonus for us. All of this is then Dockerized. It's running on Amazon's Elastic Container Service, which we really like. And to keep things kind of nice and lightweight, any asynchronous or long-running tasks, we put those on an SQS queue, you know, such as sending a push notification or a bunch of push notifications. And those tasks are then picked off by one of many Lambdas. And as you probably guessed, this is all hosted on AWS. And we also utilize Cloudflare at the edge just to make sure users around the world have a really fast and reactive experience. And finally, we manage all this using Terraform, of course, because who wants to manually manage all your environments and you know, infrastructure.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's really like the stitching of the data specifically. I find like very interesting because we see a lot of people ending up having to do quite a lot of that customized ways to get data from somewhere. Where does the data live and so on? So we talk quite a bit about that in general. And when you want to make a change to your schema, because the mobile app, what I find interesting also with the mobile app use cases specifically is that, well, people do have to upgrade their app. They have to update their app, and so that brings some interesting challenges when it comes to upgrading your schema. Can you tell me a little bit about your workflow when you have to perform a change in that direction, and how you try to mitigate the risks of disasters?
Yeah, of course. Because, you know, when you make a schema change in the world of mobile, unlike the web, you cannot break the schema because there are apps out there that aren't going to get updated for days, weeks, or months. So you got to make sure you maintain backwards compatibility. During development, we utilize Apollo Studio. We find that really, really helpful for just keeping track of how the schema is changing over time. And then when we're ready to deploy, our CI system will run a bunch of tests to, among other things, and ensure schema compatibility. We then bundle the code and dependencies together into a Docker container, and we push it up to AWS. Finally, as like a last line of defense, we do run what's I think often called a blue-green deployment. This is where we send the new code to a couple of nodes first, and we check the error rates against the nodes running the previous version of the code. And if all looks good, we retire the nodes running the old code and spin up more instances of the new code. And that really helps.
Yeah, that's very the strategies of deployment, they really become quite elaborate when you really want to manage that zero downtime kind of approaches. I think it's really cool. Yeah, I mean, we're in Halloween, so I'm also trying to kind of keep the theme. Like, what is spooky about Prisma nowadays? What are the things that you wish Prisma could be doing for you? What could we do more that would help you and your team?
Oh, great question. I really see kind of Prisma as this, I guess, glue between our code and our data layer, right? And right now it's, fantastic if you're working with Postgres or MySQL, or I guess even Microsoft SQL as of yesterday. But as you know, data comes from many places. In our case, we have a Redis cluster as well. And right now we aggregate all of that in the API layer. But it'd be really cool if one day, we could push that down the stack into Prisma almost, and not have to worry about that particular problem from an API development standpoint.
That's definitely interesting. It's something we also quite like every now and then talk quite a bit about with Soren when we project plans on the future of Prisma. So that's good to hear. And like the things you really count on the most from Prisma feature set nowadays, what would that be, the thing that you really clearly enjoy the most?
To give maybe a slightly more abstract answer, I'm a big believer in small teams, and if like tech has taught us anything, it's that kind of small focused teams can outmaneuver much larger teams, many times their size. And every now and then tools pop up, like from the Python community we had Django, and in Ruby we had Rails, obviously, that allow developers to just not worry about a bunch of the heavy lifting, and they just let teams really be lightning focused on solving problems for their customers. And I think as a whole, Prisma and the kind of surrounding ecosystem of Nexus, GraphQL, Perl, etc., they've really kind of started to become a tool of that caliber, where we don't have to worry about writing tons of boilerplate. They just let us focus on solving the problem at hand. I think the other thing we really like about Prisma is it doesn't fall into that trap of trying to solve too much. There are a lot of tools out there that seem great at first, but then maybe 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line, you realize you've kind of painted yourself into a corner, and it's maybe slightly too limiting, and you can't figure out a way or a good way to integrate this thing you wanted to integrate, or build this feature you wanted to build, or solve this problem you wanted to solve. But because Prisma and Nexus are pretty agnostic to everything else you have going on in your stack, it leaves you with like a huge amount of control and flexibility, without having to write a bunch of boilerplate SQL or API code. I think that's probably what we love about it most.
Yeah. Well, that's great, because that rhymes quite well with the mission that I stated earlier, which I think is really great to hear. I see we're slowly coming up on time. Like, maybe closing thoughts. Like, what are the plans with the app next? Like, what are the things you're looking at next?
Yeah, great question. I think the thing I'm most excited about over the next year, 2 years, is probably just seeing our API layer grow. Right now it's great for our rides and events and membership offering, but as we bring more and more services online, perhaps using Schema Federation, we can start breaking down those kind of corporate data silos, and come up with some really interesting creative solutions for our customers. that can span all our touch points. It doesn't matter if it's web or mobile or even in a physical clubhouse. It's I think that's the thing that gets me most excited.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, we'll definitely have a look and stay close to all these plans and see how we can help further. Then, well, thanks a lot, Tom. I'll give the stage back to Daniel.
Cool. Thank you so much, both Hervé and Tom, once again, joining us from London. I have a couple of small announcements to make just before we wrap up. So as always, it's always nice hosting these live events because all of you can join from wherever you are in the world. And so as part of our efforts to sort of continue these live streams, I have 2 meetups that I'd like to sort of share, and I'll also drop the links in the chat. So we have tomorrow, the October the 29th, we have the What's New in Prisma 2.10, and that will really focus on everything and all the nitty-gritty details of this release that just went out yesterday. And that will be led by Nico and Ryan from the Prisma team. We are also joining forces with GraphQL London and GraphQL Munich, and we are creating one event that will be the GraphQL Mega Meetup, and there will also be a quiz with prizes, as we similarly had in the TypeScript Meetup. And so that is taking place on Thursday next week, November the 5th. That will be at 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Central European time. And so I'll drop the link to that in the chat right now. So that is for the What's New in Prisma, and also the link to the GraphQL Mega Meetup. And so on that note, I'd like to also thank once again Tammy Bryant for joining us, Hervé for sharing some of the future of Prisma and its roadmap, and finally Tom Hutchinson, who was really generous with his time and sharing some of the work that they're doing at Rapha with Prisma. And so on that note, I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I'm wishing you a nice afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. So goodbye, and until the next Prisma meetup, see you later.